Well, welcome everyone. It's great to have you with us today. I want to start by acknowledging that Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Ohlone tribe. The land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. Consistent with our values of community and inclusion, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the university's relationship with Native peoples. My name is Derek Fong. I'm a research engineer and lecturer in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Stanford's Doerr School of Sustainability, and a research affiliate with the Bill Lane Center for the American West, who is sponsoring today's panel discussion entitled, "It Will Happen Here Again," reflecting on the LA fires and what it means for Bay Area fire prevention. First, some housekeeping things to keep this webinar running smoothly. If you have questions or comments during our panel discussion, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box. That will be at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we can try our best to respond to them. Today, we are here to discuss the recent LA fires that have impacted many people in Southern California, and likely everyone in the audience knows of one person or maybe many who were firsthand affected. The stories and images coming from LA over the past couple of weeks have been both horrific and jarring. Today, we are joined by a panel of wildfire experts who have decades of experience and spent their careers fighting wildfires and looking into tangible responses to the elevated wildfire risk experienced in California in the past several years. We hope to draw on their knowledge, experience, and insights as we prepare for the next major wildfire that will inevitably happen in Northern California. Our first panelist is David Shew. David Shew brings an impressive 32-year tenure with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, otherwise known as CAL FIRE for most of us. During his extensive career, he served in several crucial roles, including Napa County Fire Marshal, Napa County Battalion Chief, Special Operations Chief, South Division's Operations Chief, and Administrative Division Chief. Before retiring in 2018, Shew served as the staff chief for the Division of Planning and Risk Analysis in the Office of the State Fire Marshal, where he oversaw statewide fire prevention programs and developed best practices for wildfire mitigation. He is currently serving as fire administrator for Napa County. Our second panelist is Mark Brown, Chief Executive for Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, MWPA. He started his career as a volunteer firefighter in 1986 in Sonoma County. He was hired by the Marin County Fire Department as a firefighter and paramedic in 1991 and retired as deputy fire chief. After serving nearly 30 years with the Marin County Fire Department, Mark retired to assume his current position as executive officer for the MWPA. Mark served on a CAL FIRE incident management team for 15 years as a Type 1 operations section chief and was qualified as a Type 2 incident commander. Chief Brown was a founding member of the North Bay Incident Management Team and was the program manager and one of the incident commanders. His deployment includes floods, earthquakes, public health emergencies, hurricanes, oil spills, mudslides, civil unrest, wildland fires, and planned events. Last but not least, we have a third panelist, Stanford's very own Michael Wara. Michael Wara is a lawyer and scholar who focuses on climate and energy policy. Wara is a senior research scholar at the Woods Institute for the Environment and director of the Climate and Energy Policy Program. Michael's expertise sits at the intersection of science, law, and public policy. Michael also serves as a senior director for policy for the Sustainability Accelerator at Stanford's Doerr School of Sustainability. In this role, he manages an over $10 million per year portfolio of sustainability-focused technology and policy projects to drive impact at scale. Michael's breadth of knowledge and connections in the wildfire space include working with the scientific community, the insurance industry, consumer advocates, and state and government officials at developing meaningful policies and implementations of them. Welcome, gentlemen. Glad to have you here today in your busy schedules to talk about something really important. We have a lot of ground to cover. and undoubtedly many topics and questions will remain unanswered. To organize our time together, I have assembled a series of questions and topics for our panelists to address. The discussion will be followed by a chance to address some of the audience questions beginning around 1:10 p.m. Pacific time. So again, to the audience, we urge you to post any questions you might have using the Q&A feature on Zoom. Also, I should note we will be posting some links and resources shared by our panelists later on in the chat box for this webinar. Finally, this webinar will be recorded, or it is being recorded, and will be posted in the near future on the Bill Lane Center website. Time permitting, I'm hoping our speakers can speak to three very important topics today. First, the inevitability of the next fire. Second, what the state of California should do in response to the inevitable at both an elected official level as well as a community level. And then finally, the insurance crisis. So to kick things off, and I know these guys will have no problem keeping any conversation going, I'd like to ask David Shew to speak to and discuss our collective choice for the webinar title. And I should give Dr. Esther Conrad some props for coming up with the original title for this webinar. But David, can you speak to the inevitability of the wildfires in the Bay Area and elaborate on your request to include the word again in our title? Namely, it will happen here again, reflecting on the LA fires and what it means for Bay Area fire prevention.
Certainly,
David?
and thank you very much, Derek. These are important questions, and I think one that may not need a lot of explanation to a lot of people, but as anyone who's lived here for the last 5 to 10 years is well aware of the significant number of fire events that we've experienced here across the entire Bay Area, north, south, I guess I won't say west, but everything around the Bay Area has experienced some pretty significant fire activity. Thousands of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres have burned. And what we have to recognize is the fact that this entire area is a natural fire environment. Fire has been a natural part of this landscape for millenniums, millions of years, long before humans ever came here and settled. And yet we didn't really pay attention to that very well during our big growth areas. So what has happened is that as climate change has increased temperatures, which then inevitably causes fuels or vegetation to dry out more, and we see longer, hotter summers, and then we get ignition sources into those weather patterns of high winds and low humidity, we see the results of that. And these types of events have occurred for forever. We know for a fact that they are very common to this area, but now those types of events are occurring actually with more consistency, more frequency, and with more impacts than they ever have before, because there are millions of people living here that never existed before in previous millenniums. So we are witnessing quite a dramatic increase in those fire impacts. And if you only have to look at the statistical charts and seeing the curve rise exponentially. And of course, these recent fires in Los Angeles are going to keep that power line going up even faster and more. So you cannot ignore the reality. The statistics don't lie. And there is no one that would believe that this most recent fire is it. We've now peaked and it's all going to get better from here on out. I don't think you could find any scientist or fire official on the face of the planet that would ever say those words, which means that we're going to continue to see these types of events continue. They may even get worse. They'll most likely get worse. So the big question for all of us is to simply acknowledge and accept the fact that that is the reality and the world we live in. So the big question is, how do we survive that moving forward? And that's kind of what the conversation is going to entail. And how do we recreate our existing environments and build new environments in smarter ways that can withstand these increasing fire impacts into the future.
And Derek, can I highlight just to kind of expand on what David was talking about, and that's the consistency, but the change in the fire environment that we're seeing. I think it was well publicized that the Tubbs fire in 2017 was the Hanley fire in 1964. It took 2.5 days for the Hanley fire to burn the perimeter that it burned in 1964. It took 6 hours for the Tubbs fire to burn the perimeter. And there's a difference also, is the Hanley fire never jumped 101, where the Tubbs fire jumped 101 in 2017. But then I want to go back even further. 1923 is actually the first time that we have a recorded history of that fire occurring. So there should be absolutely positively no surprise that these fires occur and are going to continue to occur. That same night, 1923, that the first Hanley fire happened was the first Oakland Hills fire. That same night in 1923, Marin County had a fire that burned from Ignacio to Bolinas. So we have to stop being surprised by these fires, because surprise leads to panic, and panic leads to poor decisions.
You're muted,
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So big question for all of you, but I'll turn it over to Michael, give him a chance to open up his mic. So these are happening. They've happened. They're going to happen again. So what should we be learning, Michael? What do we need to be learning from this?
Well, I think there are, I think, more lessons to be applied than learned, and that there are some learnings that need to occur. But the real, I think we know a lot about how to build communities that are less combustible and that are going to be resistant to ignitions, home ignitions that then sort of feed on each other. One of the things I think that's important for everybody to recognize about the Los Angeles fires is you could think of them as wildfires, but really what happened there was an urban firestorm. And, we did, when the Great Chicago Fire happened, we didn't say that the problem was cows kicking over kerosene lanterns. We said we need to build a city that will not burn in the way that Chicago did on that terrible day. And the same thing is true for California neighborhoods today. And I completely agree with what David and Mark just said. This is something that is not going to change. And so the fire environment, except for the worse, as the climate causes the atmosphere to be more thirsty. And so we need to prepare in a way that we haven't maybe needed to before this. Probably since the Bel Air fire in '61, people have been talking about building better houses and defensible space. There are these wonderful pictures of Kim Novak and Richard Nixon on their roofs with garden hoses from that time. We've known that this is a problem in California. The thing that's changing is the frequency with which these disasters are happening. It's no longer a once in a generation event where I have been living in the Bay Area long enough to remember the Oakland Hills fire. That was a terrible day for the Bay Area and for many of my friends. But now we're having an Oakland Hills fire every couple of years in California, not every 30 years. And that means we need to make changes to the built environment, similar to how cities evolved to put a stop to, the fires that occurred in London when London was built out of wood. Chicago, Baltimore in the US historical experience. And we can do this, but it takes, the hard part is that it requires communication and trust and implementation at the neighborhood level, at the house by house level. And that's where what Mark and David are trying to do in Marin and Napa is so important. It's going to require different organizational structures, different kinds of governance, and also just helping people to understand that they can have a beautiful home that does not create risk for themselves and their neighbors.
Thank you, Michael. So maybe I'll go out of order here then. So you've already dove into what we need to do. So let's go from the bottom up, I guess bottom being community level. What should communities and people be doing to be more prepared? David, Mark, Michael started this off. How can communities start doing a better job at preparing for these things as opposed to being surprised?
Well, part of it's being aware that we have that problem. And also being aware that a lot of people say, well, that happens to Southern California. That happens to that community over there. That happens to that community over there. And they're not saying that's happening in my community. So part of it is the awareness. And then the other part is stop looking at other people for the solutions. We need this to be a team approach. We need all of our residents to fully engage, and we need our public entities to fully engage. And so when I'm talking about the residents, we need them to be prepared. We need them to be enrolled for alerts and notifications so that they can evacuate promptly. If they get the evacuation notification, they've already had their go bag packed and they're leaving. But they also need to take responsibility for their properties. They need their homes. We call it our house out approach. Instead of pointing at the wildlands and saying the wildlands are the problems, we're asking our residents to turn around and look at their homes and to the urban conflagration problem and realizing their homes are the fuel that's driving the fire. So we're asking our residents to take responsibility to harden their homes, make their homes less ignitable, and then create fire smart landscaping around their properties. And I like to say that the strength of our community is some of its parts. And if everyone does their part, then our safety levels go up. So that's what we need out of our residents of our communities, is to understand, accept, and take action on that risk. And then we need consistent approaches across all of our jurisdictions for supporting the residents with their home hardening defensible space, improving evacuation routes, making them safer even if there is a fire impacting that evacuation route. So a resident will be safe inside their car and they can stay in their car and not get out of their car. And create buffers or shaded fuel breaks or fuel reduction along the wildland urban interface boundary, so that as these fires are approaching the built environment, we're not going to put them out with those shaded fuel breaks or those vegetation management projects, but we're going to decrease the fire behavior. The rate of spread is going to decrease. We're going to decrease intensity, so we make it safer on our residents, give them more time to evacuate. But more importantly, we're decreasing the embers that are being produced right up against our structures, and it's those embers that are causing the fires to spread into the built environment.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mark. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I'll tag on everything that Michael and Mark have just said. Could not be more true. And so when I step back and look at this, and I doubt that there's probably anything that we're saying on this webinar that is new to anyone. I think we're not coming up with brand new ideas that no one's ever heard of. And this isn't the first time that we've ever talked about it. These comments that we're all making right now are not brand new news flashes that no one's ever heard of before. We've had these conversations. We've learned a lot. We're already beginning to get those. I'm beginning to refer to it as the similar structures of survival, like the red roof home in Lahaina that everybody became familiar with. And we're beginning to see examples of those same things in Los Angeles. And we'll learn about, why did those homes survive? What were the elements that caused them to survive? But I think, Mark's exactly right in the fact that people need to understand that they live in a risk environment. What I'm struggling with is that there's two factors. Number one is that the media is doing us no favors by only showing the big flames, the catastrophic events, the neighborhoods completely burning down, bulldozers pushing cars off the roads. All of these kind of things, I think, have a reaction to the general public, that they simply throw up their hands in complete helplessness and say, it's impossible. There's nothing I can do to try to combat these types of events, to which I couldn't disagree more. And so I think that there's a missing link someplace, and I actually don't know what it is. There's a missing link somewhere in our narrative in how we need to convey all the things that Mark just lined out. the defensible space, the homes out, the home hardening, all these kind of things. Yet we drive through neighborhoods and consistently see example after example where it is not happening. And when we continuously push this message out and people are seeing the results of successes where it has been employed versus the areas where it has not been employed, and we can see the fact that it can work, yet people still are not doing it. And I don't entirely understand. Now, this is getting into social science of, people's acceptance and willingness to take action on the things that they see as a risk and a hazard to their homes and their families and things like this. And I'm not a social scientist, so I can't speak entirely to these equations. But what I do know is that somewhere the messaging that all of us are sharing here today is not resonating, and somehow we're not finding that switch to turn on for people to say, oh, I get it. Now I'll go take action. And I'm struggling to figure out what we need to say or how we need to message these things for people to understand that on a neighborhood scale, if people were able to do all the things we're talking about here today, that it will make a difference. They don't have to just throw up their arms in hopelessness and say, there's nothing I can do. But if we do take action and do these things, we now have accepted the fact that we've reduced our vulnerability, and there's a higher likelihood, certainly, that things won't be as catastrophic as they were. We are not at a point yet. I'll be the first one to say, we don't know everything yet. We're still discovering what the answers are. And so I am unable to walk to anybody's house or any neighborhood and walk around and check boxes and say, here, folks, just do these things and you'll be fine. We're simply not there yet. But what we do know is that if you do these things, we can guarantee you that your risk has been reduced. Your insurance companies may be willing to take a look at that and say, that makes me more willing to write you an insurance policy and things like that. And I want people to please stop looking at all the horrible things that the TV is showing you and all the media feeds that you're getting, and pay attention to the things that you can do that we know will work. And that's, I guess, where I'm coming from, is not tagging on about doing more things, but trying to figure out how do we explain it and get it into a message that people will accept and take action on. That's what's going to help.
I guess the promising thing is the several hundred people who signed up for this webinar are listening right now. So hopefully they can be our ambassadors of the Shew, Brown, and Wara messages of today.
Maybe there's people who've already turned off and are out raking their bulk mulch already. That would be wonderful.
Maybe they're running off. So, there's a lot to talk about today. Mark, you raised one thing. So we're talking about preparing your space. One of the things that is really a can of worms or just waiting to be discussed is evacuation. So there are two aspects, right? You protect your home, do what you can, and a fire does happen. How should people be safely evacuating? And I'll leave that to any of you guys to talk about that topic.
I think you know me well, Derek. You hit on one of my passionate points, and that is evacuations. And number one, I said it earlier, but it's worth saying again, make sure that you are signed up for alerts and warnings. I'll take that a step further. Be situationally aware. Is it one of those drippy, wet, foggy days in the Bay Area? Or is it one of those days where the National Weather Service is saying we have a red flag warning, your fire agencies are telling you there's a red flag warning, and then are you hooked up to where you can actually hear about fires that are dispatched, so you start developing situational awareness on those red flag days? Maybe your go bag is by your front door, maybe even your car, or you actually gassed up your car, or if you have an EV, you made sure that your car is charged. Some of us even make sure that we're backed into our driveway so we can pull straight out of the driveway. So to me, part of it is before the most important part is before a fire ever starts. Then if it's a particularly bad day and you are in a particularly bad area and you have access and functional needs, maybe you decide to, on those couple of days that we have that, and we have no more than 5 to 10 a year, You go visit family that's not in a high impact area and you're completely out of the area to begin with. I also want to stress that you shouldn't necessarily wait for an evacuation order. If you feel threatened, evacuate. And then we have evacuation warnings, and then we have that says in about 2 hours, we think we may ask you to evacuate. And then there's evacuation orders, and we're asking you to evacuate. And we really ask you to evacuate when you're told. I heard too many stories of 8 hours into the Palisades fire, firefighters are rescuing people that didn't evacuate. 8 hours. And if they would have evacuated early, then there wouldn't need to be any rescue, and the firefighters can focus on suppression. And then this is where Dave's 100% right. The media does not do us any favors. If you watch any of these fires, you only see burning vehicles. I can attest to you that for every burning vehicle that you see on the fire ground, there's 10 that did not burn, but that does not show up on the media. And unfortunately, people were told to flee on foot, and they left their cars in the Pacific Palisades. Those cars blocked the evacuation route for many, many, many people behind them. And if you notice, Dave talked about footage of bulldozers pushing unburned cars. And by the way, that area that those cars were in had burned. So every one of those people that got out of that car got out of an area of safety. Firefighters take refuge in their vehicles. So we are asking the residents to do what firefighters do. Stay in your vehicle for safety. It'll get uncomfortable, but you are going to survive in your car, and then you're going to be able to go down the hill. And that's the next big message is go downhill. The fire threat lessens as you go downhill. But I think it's all preparedness. And also think about every time you drive to the supermarket, every time you drive to your school, think about that roadway being on fire and how you would move. Do your planning every time you drive up and down that road. And there are no special roads that pop up during a fire. And I'm pretty much telling you your evacuation route, and that's why I use supermarket and schools. Your evacuation route is probably how you drive to the supermarket every day or how you drive to the school every day.
Could I just add
Thank you, Mark.
one additional thought here about how we're going to bring people along in this process? And I think without like disagreeing in any way with what Mark and Dave just said, I think that the way that firefighters tend to think about this problem is right in the sense that they're going to have to go to work on that day, and they're going to be in a pitched battle with a very dangerous foe. But there is a tension in between that way of thinking about an issue and the way that people tend to think about their home. And I think this may be an important part of the communications problem that we have. When I think about my home, it is as a place where I raise my children, where I invite my friends over to be around my big table or out in my backyard to entertain them, and maybe also as my most valuable asset. And I'm very concerned about curb appeal for that asset and maintaining it in a way that maximizes its value. Now, of course, fire safety and insurance kind of connects that last part. But I think we need to find new ways to talk about things like home hardening and ember attack, because those are very kind of militarized ways of talking that run into the way that most people think about home. And I don't know what those ways are. I think there is social science that needs to be done to figure out, like, what are the concerns that people really have about their house when they make improvements, and how do we connect with those concerns? Because we're struggling to connect in the way that the science and firefighters who understand the science and are going to be, managing an emergency situation on a bad day, think and talk about the problem. And it's a challenge. I'm not saying I have the answers. I think it's something that we all need to be thinking actively about and working on it, and then trying things, and whatever works, we need to elevate that idea as much as possible.
I think that's a really great point, Michael. Right. as I think David and Mark both said, we haven't made much progress. So something has to be done in terms of the communication.
I hope that
go.
there is a day where when I go out to my driveway, I live in a place where I have a relatively hardened home, but I live amongst a community of neighbors, many of whose homes are very dangerous for lots of different reasons. And when I walk out to the end of the driveway and I see to take my garbage can and put it back, and I see my neighbor with juniper all over his front yard and mulch under the juniper, I look at that and I worry for him and his family and for our broader community of neighbors. And when we make eye contact, I want him to understand what I'm thinking in my head when I look at his front yard. And I don't think he does right now. And that's the state of knowledge and understanding that we need to advance towards. It's the process that MWPA and Napa are working towards. But it takes a lot of time and education and careful messaging.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate there. I think the messaging is critical, and I think there has been a language that has been created by the fire research and science world and the firefighting world, that we talk about these things in a language that all of us understand completely. But I have talked to a lot of homeowners who have had assessments done with their homes, even with professional companies that will do assessments for them, and they get the report and they take a look at it and they sit there, and I've literally had people say, but I don't understand it. How do I translate this into something that I can do? I don't know what this means. I don't know how to interpret it. It's almost like giving somebody a report in a foreign language that they don't know, and they have no idea how to read it or how to translate it into some kind of action. So once again, I'm going to kind of put the fingers back at all of us as researchers and practitioners who are deeply engaged in this process, and recognize the reality that the language that we speak, that we all understand among ourselves, doesn't necessarily mean anything to the general public and people who are not deeply involved in this language. And so we need to find a different way for them to understand and say, oh, that's what that means. I will say we've used the word home hardening here a number of times just here on this webinar. I can tell you flat out that there are a lot of people in the general public that may not be on this webinar that don't truly understand when you say home hardening. They have no idea what that really means or how that translates into any actionable practice for them to take place at their house. So we have a long way to go to try to still teach people what these elements are. So I don't know, part of the challenge, I think, is just in the messaging and figuring out how to make it more reality and understandable for the general public, I think.
I think this is all really important. And I'm going to have to move us along because I did want to get to insurance. One area that's been in the mind of many homeowners, people I've talked with and you read about in the news over the last several years, has been the topic of homeowners insurance. Emerging from the LA fires are many testimonies from homeowners who have lost their ability to renew their insurance just before these fires, either due to non-renewal by their insurance company or even by their own choice because of their inability to keep up with escalating insurance premiums. I've asked Michael to do a tall task to at least kick off this discussion. Michael, can you give us the audience a very short synopsis of what homeowners insurance looks like in 2025 and how things operate? Because I think a lot of people aren't aware of what goes on behind the scenes and why we have this crisis.
Sure. Well, I'm going to just sketch the problem, and I think then we can all talk about it and add our own nuance, because I think David and Mark also have a lot to say here and are very knowledgeable. So homeowners insurance is required for all homes that have a mortgage, and it's just generally a good idea because your home is your most valuable asset. And as we've been saying, these fires will happen and they will happen again. And so we need to be ready for that. The reality is that for a long time, the homeowner insurance is a state regulated product. And the reason it's regulated is that you need to make sure that the insurers have enough money on hand to pay claims after a disaster. Otherwise, there'd be a temptation to collect the money, pay it out in dividends to shareholders, and then be gone, just declare bankruptcy when claims come in. So the regulator is there. For a long time, the regulator in California, I think it's fair to say, suppressed prices, like kept the amount that insurers are allowed to charge below the price they needed to charge in order to fully to have risk-based pricing. And there are lots of complicated reasons for that. The situation has been getting better in the last few years, and the insurance regulator, the California Department of Insurance, has something called the Sustainable Insurance Strategy that they've been slowly rolling out over time, that leading up to this disaster would have really helped. The challenge now is that the insurance industry has just taken a major loss in these LA fires that may be so destabilizing that we need to do more than just the sustainable insurance strategy. I think it's too soon to know how much more, but there are models for what that more looks like in the southeastern United States, which are subject to hurricane risk. And those models generally involve a lot of the things that David and Mark do in their jurisdictions, like actually reducing risk and then providing some sort of a public reinsurance backstop. Reinsurance is insurance for insurance companies, and it's really there to manage these catastrophic risks, not an individual house fire, which is kind of, the odds that I have a house fire are uncorrelated with the odds of anyone else on this webinar having a house fire. But if Mark and David and Derek and I happen to live in the same neighborhood, we could all be involved in the same wildfire. And that's what reinsurance is designed to manage, big catastrophes. The reinsurers are looking at California right now and saying, I'm not sure this is a good place to do business. If they go away, or if their coverage for the regular insurers gets harder to come by or more expensive, the entire market is probably going to be in a big crisis. And that's where the state would have to step in and maybe provide a public reinsurance backstop for a few years, hopefully not forever. But we'll see. I think it's fair to assume that insurance is going to get more expensive and perhaps less available as a result of this crisis. And it was already moving in both of those directions before it. So we're going to really need to help people to maintain homeownership in California in an affordable way.
Mark, David, what do you guys think? Do you have a crystal ball? We're going to figure this out?
I think I can share one silver lining, that there are some new insurance companies who are recognizing that the model of not recognizing prevention work that has been done has been lacking from the insurance space for forever. And so there are some new models coming in, some new insurance companies who are creating business models solely to focus on what prevention and risk reduction efforts that you as a homeowner and your neighborhood are taking. They may look at the map and say, yes, you're in a very high fire hazard severity zone or a very risky area, but look at what you've done. And you've taken the steps to really reduce that risk, and that's worth insuring. So we're just on the cusp of seeing some insurance companies coming in and focusing in that way. And if there's no more incentive to tell people, get out and start taking care of these things, it's the fact that there are insurance companies that are paying particular attention just to those things that you're doing or not doing in some cases. So keep in mind the fact that this is a change in the industry and things could get better because of that.
And to kind of add on to that, and I'm going to bring up a new term, maybe not new to us, but new to some people in the group, and that's zone zero. And many of the insurance industries and these new insurers that Dave was talking about that would be interested in insuring in high risk areas are going to require zone zero. And what zone zero is, from 0 to 5 feet away from the house, nothing is combustible, because what happens is the embers fly up against our house, they hit the house, land, and start whatever is up against the house on fire. That fire licks up, goes into our attic, and our house burns down. So zone zero is one of the #1 things that you can do around your house, and a lot of other home hardening items. And that home hardening is what we do to our structure to make it less ignitable, can be expensive. Class A roofs, changing your siding, your windows, all of that can be expensive, but creating zone zero is not. And I can almost guarantee you there's going to be the one thing that the insurers require for them to re-engage is zone zero. And one of the questions that we didn't really get to is, what do we need our public officials to do? And I really think a consistent zone zero ordinances across all of our jurisdictions is a way to get there. And if we don't enforce it, the insurers aren't going to take it seriously.
One of the things I think is people hear a lot about private firefighting and insurance. And, you know, they have this idea that the private firefighters only are working for, you know, to protect $20 million homes. The reality today is that the private firefighters cover something like 50% of the insured market. And what they do during a fire is not what people think. They're not there with hoses and water. They show up and create zone zero around the structures they're responsible for. They go in with chainsaws and they make it very quickly, and then they move on to the next house. And that tells you something about what the insurers think is important. They're willing to hire people to go and do the gardening that the homeowners didn't in advance of a fire coming to that house. And I think I totally agree with what Mark said. There is regulation at the Board of Forestry that has not been finalized, that needs to be finalized and implemented, that would create a zone zero requirement under state law. And it's hard. It's politically hard because it's telling people what their gardens need to look like. And this again gets to the communications problem. We need to create models for that people are excited about, that they think will actually increase their home value rather than thinking that it's going to make their house look like a bunker. But we can do that. We can't, because we're not landscape architects, but I bet there are a lot of really talented landscape architects that could.
Yeah, just a side anecdote. Dave and I said we should have a hackathon for landscape architects to come up with the most innovative designs for home hardening that look beautiful, right? Have a competition.
I'm waiting.
David, you were going to say something else? We have a lot of questions from the public,
No,
but I want to make sure
No, I'd like us to get to the questions because I think we've talked enough here.
So, okay, so we have, I believe, 77 questions. So I'm just going to use I'm not even going to give names, but I have some great colleagues trying to distill some relevant questions that we probably could spend all our time on even one of them. So let me give one here to start. One of the audience members have asked, how do we address better coordination across the maze of jurisdictions that are involved in fire prevention and response? Simple question, right?
Yeah.
Anyone?
It's back to that common language again, and hopefully that we're not using different language, because that's endlessly confusing too. Even if we're trying to say the same thing, but we're using different words, then people get confused. So there are a lot of people, and I think there is a lot more coordination than there was even 5 years ago. So I think the big groups, the National Fire Protection Association, the IBHS, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, the insurance industry themselves weighing into, work with science research and practitioners is improving. And so I think we'll see a continuing merge of those languages and comments to make it more understandable for people that aren't just hearing different things.
And then as far as taking action and being on the ground, that question is exactly what led to Marin Wildfire being created. And that was the understanding that wildfire does not appreciate any jurisdictional boundaries, and that we needed to take broad effort across all of our jurisdictional boundaries. And so that's why a joint powers authority that called Marin Wildfire was created. We were able to fund it. And now our 17 member agencies are all coordinating together, doing the same type of work at the same pace and scale. And our next level of efforts is to consolidate and create consistent codes across all of our jurisdictions.
Excellent. So we've got a lot of questions that my colleagues have tried to distill down for us. And this is really back to a topic we had just a few moments ago. What can property owners do? And so some of the questions have been, what should they be spending their money on? Fire pumps, outdoor sprinklers? How do rooftop solar panels affect fire risk? What about the introduction of non-native species?
A lot of questions there.
Yes.
I'll take a stab at a couple of them. I think that, first of all, I think people need to step back and understand the very basic first. The very basic issue of fire is that there's only 3 ways that your house is ever going to ignite from a fire. That's if the flames actually find a path to burn right up to your house and the flames actually ignite your house. So you have to figure out how to break that path and not allow the flames to ever get there to begin with. The second thing is if you have things too close to the house and a big fire nearby for a long enough period of time will provide enough radiant heat to ignite your house. So you need to make sure that something burning nearby doesn't put off enough radiant heat to ignite it. But the primary cause of structure ignitions today that we know is because of the embers. And as Mark described, they hit the house, they bounce down to the ground, they'll ignite anything around it, whether it's deck furniture or plants or bark mulch or whatever the case may be, and your house can ignite from that area. So based on those three things, you have to understand the fact that, one, make sure that you've removed any pathway for fire to ever reach your house to begin with. Number two, you've done the best job that you can to reduce the amount of radiant heat that might affect an ignition. But the most important part goes back to Mark's description of the zero zone, is to remove the elements that embers are going to find a way to ignite your structure. And that means looking at especially older homes that might have cracks and crevices and joints where embers could get into those joints and then find an ignition source to ignite your house. We need to be able to look at those things. And quite frankly, every house is going to be a little bit different. That's the difficulty of it. This is not a one-size-fits-all solution. You have to be able to understand those three basic elements and then take a serious look at your home and be able to remove those three abilities for fire to ever ignite your home to begin with. That's the very simplistic answer. Sprinklers and everything else, they can work. They don't work sometimes. We don't know enough about them, quite frankly. We haven't done enough research to really fully understand it. And solar panels have not proven to be a big problem yet. We don't see solar panels as being an ignition source primarily. So that's kind of low on our totem pole to study. But those are the things that I'll share, and I'll let the other two panelists weigh in.
Can I bring Dave listed a bunch of things that can be done, and sometimes when a homeowner looks at that, whether they evaluated their property themselves or they had an inspection from a private industry or one of our fire department inspectors, they can see that list of task items and just get overwhelmed with the amount of work that there is and be afraid, well, there's nothing I can do. So we really recommend to look at it as a multi-year project, and you're going to find the items that you can attack and just prioritize the house out. The closer to your house, the higher priority that work should be done. And then there's been a lot of talk about community, about neighbors. And I am a big fan of Firewise communities. It's through the National Fire Protection Association. And what I like about Firewise communities, it's the community members coming together and deciding that they are going to work together as community members. They help reinforce that language that we've been talking about. They're the ones that are talking that language, and they're the ones bringing their neighbors along. And peer pressure does tend to work pretty well in neighborhoods. And so we're seeing a lot more compliance when we do our inspections and our work when we go into a Firewise community as opposed to a non-Firewise community. And if you just Google Firewise NFPA, you'll find a ton of information about it.
Excellent. Michael, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to highlight something that David said, which is like to think about this, like people are busy. You know, I'll just speak for myself. I'm raising two kids. My wife works. I have a job. There are many items on our agenda on a Saturday morning. And so I think it's really helpful if people can prioritize an action that they can take, recognizing that, next year or next month, they might need to take another action. Certainly, and I would absolutely endorse the idea that Mark's has repeatedly come back to, that we need to think about the house and move outward. And so, like, can you put screens over your attic vents? Get that done. That is a huge improvement in fire safety for an older structure. Can you address zone 0, like the area adjacent to your house, in some way that is attractive to you and doesn't create, marital strife between you and your partner about how your backyard looks? And that's a project, and I think if we can start to implement at scale the mitigations that really matter and that are affordable for people to do, we can make a big difference on this problem.
Excellent. So I lost my question here, but just leapfrogging on that, one of the questions here, I'm going to mess up the actual reference, was to add another jargon. We actually have not brought up WUI yet today, the wild and urban interface. And the question I found here is, what kind of tailored advice do our panelists have for home hardening in a denser urban area versus maybe a home right on the WUI? Do you have any advice for
Could I
urban,
jump
more
in and
urban?
Yeah, I live in that world. And we have 8-foot lateral setbacks in my neighborhood. So that means my home is 16 feet away from the adjacent home. And we also have deer that are like locusts. And so the problem in our neighborhood is what are called attached wood fences. So the fence goes from my house to the property line. There's a fence down the property line, and then the fence just continues right on to my neighbor's house. And those wooden fences are extremely dangerous and a very important issue in denser neighborhoods. And so probably the most important thing in a more dense, or one of the things that is very important in a dense neighborhood and is to put something that is metal in that side yard fence so that you prevent the fence from igniting from the embers and then burning like a fuse into your house. And I look at this, what we need to do is turn all those side yard gates and the little part of the gate that's then attached to the house into metal. And that can be attractive. You can paint it to match the color of your home. You can do lots of things to make it look better and an attractive and probably more functional part of your house, because a metal gate is going to function better than a saggy wooden one that gets heavy in the winter. And be much safer. And that would be one key step that you see so commonly in denser kind of suburban or semi-urban neighborhoods that have fire risk.
Yeah, and I don't want to make people think it's like, oh, great, now you've just given me another task to go research this and find out what to do there. So one of the research, just one of the resources I want to mention is the California Fire Safe Council has created a very good list of vendors and recommended products and materials that they have vetted that people can go to that are all focused on fire safety. So if you don't have the time to research it, you can go to certain websites to be able to access these issues. And I'm sure, Marin Wildfire and things has readily information available. The National Fire Protection Association. There's a lot of resources you can go to find these things out. So you don't have to spend a lot of time researching it yourself. You can go find lists of things that other people have already done the research for you.
Thanks,
And
David.
if I could add on for that built environment, it's 100% on the non-wood portions of the fence. Zone 0 is even more important in that dense environment. And then a reminder that we're not asking for everyone to move all their vegetation. What we're asking for is horizontal separation and vertical separation of vegetation. And then one of the biggest complaints that we hear is that tree that's right on the property line that's overhanging the neighbor's roof. And that could be a common problem, and that takes neighborly effort. But another home hardening item, not to add to your list though, is gutter guards are an important home hardening item.
All good points. So circling back to insurance, this is, again, an easy question. How do we encourage the insurance companies to come back to California or to stay? Especially in light of what we already talked about with this new crisis. I mean, do you guys have some magic wand to provide?
Certainly in my conversations with primary insurers and reinsurers, the thing that they want to see is what Mark and David are doing. The reality is that we need to reduce risk so that then the amount of risk we have left is affordable to transfer to somebody else. Like insurance is risk transfer, right? It's paying someone take your risk so you don't have to deal with it anymore. And if there's too much risk, which right now in California, we have a lot of wildfire risk. If there's too much, then the price that person is going to accept to take your risk off your hands is just too high for you to afford. You know, there are places in Florida now where home insurance costs $50,000 to $70,000 a year for a $500,000 to $700,000 house, right? So they're basically saying there's a 1 in 10 chance that your house will be destroyed in a hurricane. That kind of result in California would be incredibly destabilizing to homeownership, and we need to avoid it. And the way to do it is successful implementation of all of the kind of very localized, you know, practices on the property, the work that Mark is doing in Marin to build community scale protections. That's how we achieve affordable, available insurance. There's also other, you know, sort of wonky insurance regulatory changes that need to happen. We need to have better transparency into what people are actually doing so they can be recognized and rewarded for that on their insurance. That's starting to happen. But the big thing is we just got to reduce the risk. And we can do it. It's not impossible. It's very doable.
Excellent. We are almost out of time, but I have to ask this last question or comment because it's actually asking for repetition. So it shows you that the audience has been paying attention. They're asking for a definition of zone 0 one more time, and also follow-upping, would zone 0 include all homes in California or just those in high severity risk zones? So I want to take a stab. I think I could do it, but you guys can do it.
Every house.
Zone 0 is from 0 to 5 feet away from the structure and no combustible items. And I also was reminded that we also want, if there's combustible siding, the combustible siding needs to stop 6 inches above the ground. So you would have 6 inches of non-combustible foundation and then the combustible siding for true zone 0. And that question of, is it every zone or every home in California, or what is the definition of zone 0 is exactly why the Board of Forestry has not been able to implement that regulation yet, because the details of that. And so I can't right now, I can't answer that question about if it's going to be every home in California.
That's why it's so tough, and that's why it's not in effect yet.
Yes.
Because those words that take that idea and put it into regulatory language is very difficult. And it's proving to be very difficult. So we're still waiting for that final language to come out. But I would say there's very few homes that would have the luxury of saying, I don't need to worry about that. The likelihood of fire in the state of California is in totality a fire-prone environment overall. And so we need to become more commonly, this is going back to the very beginning conversation, we need to be able to recognize the fact that we have the likelihood that we will be impacted by fire at some point in the future, and we have to take action now before that ignition occurs.
We are out of time. I know there were a lot of questions. In fact, people wanted to hear about enforcement. They wanted to hear about renters. We've collected all the questions. We'll pass them on to the speakers. I can't promise you'll get a response privately, but thank you for everyone's attention today. I'd like to thank our panelists for their time. Their phones have been ringing off the hook over the last couple of weeks with all these things happening. But I hope the audience has found the conversation enlightening and encouraging, maybe in some ways, and spurring people to action and sharing that word with their neighbors and people in their social circles. It's been a pleasure to have you all joining us today. Just sort of selling another thing. If you really are interested in wildfires, please look in the chat portion of this Zoom session. You can find a bunch of links that have been provided by our panelists. And moreover, this spring, I will be hosting a wildfire research seminar looking at more some of the nuance and details of what we're doing to investigate wildfires and hopefully develop more climate resilient, wildfire resilient communities. So stay tuned for that. It'll be advertised on the Woods Institute and Bill Lane Center email list, and feel free to join us this spring. Again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you for the audience, and everyone, please be safe and let's hopefully get through it together. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.
Derek.
Take care.